Show business doesn't run on talent. It runs on desperation and suppressed pheromones. 3 years ago, an alpha idol was caught in a scandal that should have buried him permanently. Someone had to take the fall, clean up the wreckage, and rewrite the narrative from scratch. That someone was yours truly. He got the sold-out stadium tours and the screaming fans. What did the Omega Who Saved Him get? Erased. But here's the reality about ghosts. Eventually they stop haunting you and just walk away. Fluorescent lights always make the agency briefing room look exactly like a morgue. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday when the call came in. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, distorting the neon city lights into ugly, smeared streaks. At 24, I was already the senior crisis manager for Apex Entertainment, a title that essentially meant I was a glorified janitor for beautiful people with terrible impulse control. Dathan Lopez was our crown jewel. He was the kind of alpha engineered in a boardroom to make audiences lose their minds. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline that could cut glass and a voice that sounded like crushed velvet. His public persona was the untouchable, disciplined prince of pop. The reality, lying on the floor of a trashed penthouse suite at the Four Seasons, was considerably less glamorous. When I pushed through the heavy mahogany doors of room 412, the air was suffocating. The acrid stench of burnt ozone and pure, unadulterated panic hit the back of my throat. Dathan's pheromones were completely out of control, flooding the room with the heavy scent of an alpha forced into an early rut. Furniture was overturned. A glass coffee table lay in a million glittering shards, a Lopez the Persian rug. Dathan was backed into the corner, knees pulled to his chest, shaking violently. His designer shirt was torn, his knuckles bruised and bleeding. Someone had spiked his drink at a private industry party, triggering a biological tailspin that could have ended his career or someone's life if he had stumbled into the lobby instead of locking himself in this room. I didn't hesitate. I dropped my briefcase and stepped over the broken glass. Crisis management isn't about PR statements. It's about control. I knelt in front of him, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. He growled, a low, terrifying sound vibrating in his chest, his eyes blown wide and glassy. He was entirely lost to the fever. I reached into my pocket, uncapped a heavy-duty suppressant auto-injector, and jammed it directly into his thigh. He lunged. His heavy hands gripped my shoulders, pinning me to the floor. The weight of an enraged alpha is a physical pressure that compresses your lungs. He buried his face in my neck, inhaling sharply. I hadn't taken my own scent blockers yet that morning. My natural Omega scent, usually kept strictly buried under layers of clinical, unscented soaps, leaked out in my stress. He didn't bite. He just collapsed. The frantic, violent energy drained out of him the second the suppressants hit his bloodstream and my scent grounded his spiraling nervous system. He buried his face in my collarbone, clutching my jacket like a frightened child. "It's over," I said quietly, staring at the cracked plaster on the ceiling while his breathing leveled out. "I've got you." The next 48 hours were a masterclass in deception. I paid off the hotel manager using the company's black card. I drafted a fake medical report detailing a severe bout of food poisoning to explain his absence from the morning press junket. I spent 6 hours on the phone threatening, bribing, and negotiating with a tabloid reporter who had seen Dathan being dragged into the elevator by his security detail. I didn't sleep. I survived on black coffee and adrenaline, weaving a bulletproof narrative that completely shielded Dathan from the fallout. By Thursday afternoon, the narrative was set. Dathan was a hard-working victim of exhaustion. The public sent get-well-soon cards. When Dathan finally woke up, coherent and sober in his private recovery suite, I was sitting in the armchair by the window, finishing the final press release. He looked at me, his face pale, the arrogance stripped away. He knew exactly what had almost happened, and he knew exactly who had stopped it. "Corbin," he whispered, his voice raspy, I owe you. Everything. I won't forget this. I swear to God." I didn't smile. I just closed my laptop. "Just don't do it again, Dathan. I can't build a miracle twice." That was 3 years ago. 3 years of grinding work, of hovering in the background while he climbed from national sensation to global superstar. 3 years of remembering the weight of him in my arms, the vulnerability in his eyes, and the promise he made. It's funny how quickly an alpha can forget the dark once they are back in the light. Champagne always tastes like battery acid when you're strictly off the clock but forced to attend a gala anyway. The Crystal Awards were the pinnacle of the music industry's social calendar. The ballroom was a sea of bespoke velvet, blinding diamonds, and the heavy clashing pheromones of 1,000 powerful people pretending to like each other. I stood by the marble pillar near the emergency exit, wearing a tailored black suit that cost less than the hors d'oeuvres tray circulating past me. My job tonight was purely observational. Make sure none of our junior talent got caught snorting anything in the bathrooms, and ensure Dathan hit his media marks. Dathan was holding court in the center of the room. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He was laughing, tossing his head back at a joke told by a rival agency's lead actress. He looked radiant, untouchable. The burnt ozone smell of his rut was a distant memory replaced by the crisp, curated scent of sandalwood and expensive cologne. He hadn't spoken more than 3 consecutive words to me in 18 months. It didn't happen all at once. The freeze-out was gradual. First, it was skipped meetings. Then, it was requesting a different handler for his international tours. Eventually, I was demoted from his primary fixer to a background analyst. He couldn't fire me. I knew where the bodies were buried. But he could erase me. Every time he looked at me, I knew he didn't see Corbin, the guy who saved his life. He saw the worst night of his existence. I was a walking, talking reminder that the perfect alpha was flawed. So, he chose to look right through me. I checked my watch. 11:45 p.m. 15 more minutes and I could slip out the back, hail a cab in the rain, and forget this industry existed until 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. "Excuse me," a voice broke through the low hum of the crowd. I blinked, pulling my attention away from Dathan. A man stood next to me, holding 2 glasses of scotch. He was taller than me, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a relaxed posture that didn't belong in a room full of sharks. Rachel Pierce. Rachel was the industry's most sought-after producer. He was an alpha, but he didn't project the suffocating dominance most of them relied on. His scent was subtle, petrichor, and old paper. He was known for being brutally honest, fiercely protective of his artists, and completely uninterested in celebrity politics. "You look like you're plotting a murder, or at least a very aggressive tax audit," Rachel said, offering me one of the glasses. I hesitated, then took it, just calculating the exact minute it becomes socially acceptable to leave. Rachel leaned against the pillar beside me, looking out at the crowd. "It's been acceptable for an hour. Everyone here is just too terrified to be the first one out the door." He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes scanning the room before landing on the center of the crowd. "Lopez looks good tonight," swept the board. "He usually does," I said neutrally. Rachel shifted his gaze from Dathan to me. He didn't look at my cheap suit or the dark circles under my eyes. He just looked at me. "You're Corbin Mendoza, right? Apex's ghost." I stiffened. "I prefer crisis management consultant." "Sure," Rachel chuckled quietly. "I've seen the fires you've put out. You do impossible work. Yet somehow you're standing in the corner drinking bad scotch while the people you build take the center stage." Before I could answer, a sudden shift in the crowd parted the sea of bodies. Dathan was walking toward the exit, his entourage trailing behind him. His publicist, a frantic beta named Sarah, was guiding him right past my pillar. "Dathan, wait, before we head to the after-party," Sarah said, pointing a manicured finger toward me. "Have you met Corbin from the risk management department? He's handling the back end of the European tour." Dathan stopped. He was less than 3 feet away from me. I looked up, meeting his eyes. For a fraction of a second, I saw the flicker of recognition. I saw the memory of the hotel room, the broken glass, the desperate grip on my collar. Then the mask slid down. The shutters closed. His eyes went flat, polite, and completely vacant. "No, I don't believe we've Lopez'd paths," Dathan said, his voice smooth and empty. He offered a tight, professional nod. Keep up the good work, Corbin. He didn't wait for a response. He just kept walking. I stood there, the glass of scotch suddenly heavy in my hand. It wasn't the lie that broke me. I was used to lies. I manufactured them for a living. It was the ease with which he delivered it. It was the complete, utter dismissal of my existence. "Wow," Rachel murmured beside me, his voice entirely devoid of humor. That was remarkably cold. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the empty space where Dathan had been standing. A cold, heavy clarity settled in my chest, freezing the last lingering drop of loyalty I had left for this agency, and for him. "I have to go." I set the untouched scotch down on a passing waiter's tray. Rachel caught my arm. His grip was light, respectful, but grounding. "Mendoza, if you ever get tired of cleaning up after ungrateful princes, call me. I need people who actually know how to hold a foundation together." He handed me a sleek, matte black business card. I took it, shoved it in my pocket, and walked out into the rain. Resignation letters shouldn't be hard to write when you despise your job, but formatting a clean break from a 3-year toxic relationship takes a specific kind of mental gymnastics. The agency was dead quiet at 6 a.m. on Wednesday. The cleaning crew had just finished vacuuming the plush carpets of the executive floor. The smell of artificial lemon cleaner masked the usual scent of stale coffee and anxiety. I sat at my desk. A small, windowless glass box, ironically located right next to the expansive PR boardroom. I pulled up a blank document on my monitor. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought about the last 3 years. I thought about the 3 a.m. phone calls, the panic attacks I suppressed in bathroom stalls so I could negotiate with blackmailers, the holidays spent drafting apology statements for people who weren't sorry. I thought about Dathan's eyes looking at me like I was a smudge on a window pane he was eager to wipe away. I started typing. To management. Effective immediately, I am resigning from my position at Apex Entertainment. I forfeit my severance package in exchange for a waiver of my non-compete clause as per Section 4B of my contract. All current crisis files have been securely handed over to the primary server. It was 3 sentences to dismantle my entire adult career. I hit send before I could overthink it. The physical relief was instantaneous. It felt like I had been carrying a 100-pound lead vest for 1,000 days, and someone had just unbuckled the straps. I grabbed a cardboard box from the supply closet and started tossing my life into it. It didn't take long. A few notebooks, a ceramic mug, a framed photo of my dog who had passed away 2 years ago. I didn't have personal artifacts because I hadn't had a personal life. By 6:45 a.m., I was done. I left my company phone and my silver access keycard sitting exactly in the center of the bare desk. I picked up the box and walked toward the elevators. The hallway was still empty, the silence stretching out like a held breath. I pushed the down button. The digital display blinked, counting down the floors. Ding. The polished metal doors slid open. My lungs seized. Standing in the center of the elevator was Dathan. He was in his gym clothes, a black hoodie pulled up, sweatpants, carrying a duffel bag. He clearly used the private executive gym on the top floor before the staff arrived. He looked exhausted. The glamorous veneer of the gala entirely stripped away, leaving behind the raw, jagged edges of the alpha I had scraped off a hotel floor. He froze when he saw me. His eyes darted from my face to the cardboard box in my hands. The heavy silence between us was loud enough to shatter glass. For the first time in 18 months, the scent of his perfectly curated cologne slipped. Beneath it, I caught a sharp, acrid spike of pure distress. It was barely there, quickly suffocated by his control, but I spent years reading this man's biochemistry. He was panicking. "What is that?" Dathan asked. His voice was lower than usual, tight and unpolished. "It's a box, Dathan," I said smoothly. My voice was incredibly steady, the frantic need to please, to fix, to soothe. It was just gone. "I know it's a box." He took a half step forward, his hand resting on the elevator door to stop it from closing. His knuckles were white. "What are you doing, Corbin?" He said my name. Not the guy from risk management, not silence. My name. I'm leaving, I said, stepping into the elevator. I forced him to step back to make room for me. My resignation was sent 15 minutes ago. You'll have a new handler for the European tour. Sarah has the files. Dathan stared at me, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. You can't leave. You run the back end. You fix things. I did, I corrected quietly. I reached out and pressed the button for the lobby. I don't anymore. Is this about last night? The arrogance tried to bleed back into his tone, a defensive reflex. Because I had to play the room, Corbin. You know how this works. I can't be seen fraternizing with the fixers. It ruins the image. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was a beautiful, hollow structure, and I had been the scaffolding holding him up for so long that he genuinely believed he was standing on his own. It's not about last night, Dathan. Last night was just the punchline to a 3-year joke. I shifted the box in my arms. The elevator doors began to slide shut. You told me once that you wouldn't forget what I did for you, but you did. And that's fine. It's your career, but it's my life, and I want it back. Corbin, wait. Dathan reached out, his hand flying toward the door, panic finally breaking completely through his voice. The doors snapped shut. The elevator began its rapid descent to the ground floor. I closed my eyes, letting the hum of the machinery drown out the memory of his panicked face. When the doors opened to the rainy morning street, I stepped out into the damp air, took a deep breath of the city, and felt completely, beautifully empty. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the matte black business card. It was time to make a call. Adjusting to a normal sleep schedule feels remarkably like recovering from a severe head injury. For the first 2 weeks at Blueprint Studios, my body routinely woke me up at 3:15 a.m., my heart hammering against my ribs, adrenaline flooding my veins in anticipation of a catastrophe that no longer existed. I would sit on the edge of my bed in the dark, staring at a silent phone, waiting for a fire to put out. It took 14 days for my nervous system to realize the war was over. Blueprint Studios was the antithesis of Apex Entertainment. Located in a converted warehouse on the industrial edge of the city, it smelled of roasted coffee beans, warm acoustic foam, and the faint grounding scent of Rachel's petrichor. There were no fluorescent lit glass cages here. The walls were exposed brick, the floors scuffed hardwood, and the artists who walked through the doors were treated like musicians, not volatile corporate assets. Rachel Pierce didn't hire me to be a janitor. He brought me on as the head of operations. On my first day, I walked into his office expecting a list of NDAs to file and scandals to monitor. Instead, he slid a mug of black coffee a Lopez his desk and handed me the raw audio files for a new indie band's debut album. Listen to it, Rachel had said, leaning back in his chair. He was wearing a faded band t-shirt and jeans, a sharp contrast to the suffocating bespoke suits I was used to managing. Tell me where you think we should drop the marketing budget. You spent 3 years predicting exactly what millions of people would think before they even thought it. I want that brain working on building things up, not tearing things down. I hadn't known how to respond. For 3 years, my opinions only mattered when things were falling apart. Being asked for a creative perspective felt like speaking a language I had forgotten. But Rachel waited. He didn't push, he didn't demand, and he didn't flood the room with impatient alpha pheromones. He just drank his coffee and gave me the space to speak. Working with Rachel was a study in unlearning trauma. I didn't realize how deeply conditioned I was until the second week, when a junior sound engineer accidentally knocked over a heavy mic stand. It hit the floor with a sharp, violent crack that echoed through the mixing bay. Before I even registered the sound, my body reacted. My heart seized, my breath hitched, and I instantly stepped in front of the console, my hands raised in a placating gesture, completely braced for an enraged alpha to start destroying the room. Silence fell over the studio. The junior engineer froze, apologizing profusely. I stood there, rigid, my nails digging into my palms, suddenly hyper-aware of the fact that I was treating a dropped piece of equipment like a hostage situation. Heat flushed up my neck. I lowered my hands, stepping back, completely humiliated. Rachel didn't yell at the engineer. He told the kid to take a 15-minute break. Once the door clicked shut, Rachel turned to me. He didn't look at me with pity, which I would have hated. He looked at me with a quiet, furious understanding. He closed the distance between us slowly, telegraphing his movements so he wouldn't startle me. "Corbin," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that vibrated pleasantly in the quiet room. "Nobody breaks glass here." I swallowed hard, staring at the floorboards. I know, it was just a reflex built by a man who didn't deserve your time. Rachel stepped closer, just enough that his scent, cool rain on dry earth, wrapped around my frayed nerves. It wasn't oppressive. It was a shield. "You don't have to hold your breath in my studio. You're safe here. Do you understand me?" I finally looked up, meeting his eyes. They were dark, entirely focused, and completely sincere. "Yes," I breathed out, the word carrying a weight I didn't know I was still holding. We didn't talk about it again. We didn't need to. But from that day on, I noticed small changes. Rachel made sure doors weren't slammed. He stood between me and the chaotic crowds when we went to underground scout shows. He checked in, consistently, not as a boss monitoring an employee, but as an alpha naturally, respectfully making sure his Omega partner was grounded. It wasn't romantic, not yet. But it was the foundation of something deeply rooted in trust, a concept I hadn't experienced in years. I was finally breathing. I was building a roster of artists who actually thanked me. I was gaining weight back, the hollow shadows under my eyes fading. I was becoming a person again. And right as I finally found my footing, the meticulously constructed empire I had left behind started to burn. Disaster doesn't usually announce itself with a thunderclap. It starts as a hairline fracture under extreme pressure. It had been 4 weeks since I walked out of Apex. Dathon's European tour, a massive 80-city behemoth designed to cement his status as a global icon, was scheduled to kick off in London. I had spent 6 months laying the groundwork for it. I knew the logistics down to the minute. I also knew exactly where the weak points were and exactly how much daily maintenance Dathon required to keep from spiraling under the stress. I was sitting on the velvet couch in Rachel's mixing booth, eating takeout Thai food and going over a contract when my burner phone buzzed. I had left my corporate phone on my desk, but a few people at Apex still had my personal number. I glanced at the glowing screen. Sarah, public relations. I let it ring out. I took another bite of noodles. 10 seconds later, it buzzed again. Then a third time. Rachel, who was adjusting a vocal track at the massive soundboard, paused his work. He spun his chair around, leaning back, watching the phone vibrate against the glass coffee table. "If she calls a fourth time, I'm answering it and telling her you died in a tragic boating accident." I snorted, wiping my mouth with a napkin. She'd probably ask for a copy of the death certificate so she could draft a press release capitalizing on the tragedy. When the phone buzzed a fourth time, I finally picked it up. I didn't say hello, I just pressed it to my ear. "Corbin, thank God," Sarah's voice poured out of the speaker, tight, shrill, and vibrating with pure panic. She sounded like she was hiding in a closet. "Please tell me you didn't block my number." "I'm eating dinner, Sarah. You have exactly 30 seconds before I hang up." "It's Dathon," she blurted out, her breathing ragged. "We're at Wembley. The opening show is in 3 hours. He won't come out of his dressing room." I stared at the acoustic foam on the far wall. Sounds like a problem for his new handler. "He fired the new handler," Sarah cried. "He fired him on Tuesday because the guy booked the wrong hotel wing in Paris. And then he fired the backup handler this morning because she couldn't get his scent blockers mixed correctly. He's a nightmare, Corbin. He's snapping at everyone. His pheromones are flooding the entire backstage area. The backup dancers are getting physically sick from the pressure, and he locked the door. He said he's not going on stage." A familiar, icy phantom pain twinged in my chest. The instinct to fix it, to book a flight, to grab my medical kit and sprint into the fire, flared up. A muscle memory burned deep into my bones. But then I looked at Rachel. He was watching me quietly. He wasn't telling me what to do. He was just present, a steady anchor in the room. The scent of rain and earth pushed back against the sudden spike of anxiety in my chest. "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat. I do not work for Apex. I do not work for Dathan. Call a doctor to forcibly suppress him, or cancel the show and claim a throat infection. That's the playbook. You know how to use it. He won't let the doctors in. He's asking for you. He's demanding you. He says you're the only one who knows the dosage. Corbin, please, the board of directors is threatening to pull the plug. If this show doesn't happen, the tour's dead. He's going to ruin himself. Then let him. The line went dead quiet. Even Sarah, entirely driven by corporate panic, was stunned into silence. He built this, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He wanted to stand alone on the pedestal. Let him see what it actually costs. I ended the call. I turned the phone off completely, tossing it onto the couch cushion next to me. My hands were shaking. I clenched them into fists, resting them on my knees, taking slow, deep breaths to force the adrenaline back down. Rachel pushed himself out of his chair. He walked over, picked up the takeout container of noodles I had abandoned, and set it aside. He sat down next to me on the couch, leaving a respectful foot of space between us, but turning his body so he was angled toward me. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just phantom limb syndrome. I spent 3 years keeping that particular building from burning down. It feels weird to just sit here and watch the smoke from a distance." "You aren't watching it burn," Rachel corrected gently. "You just stopped throwing your own body on the flames to put it out." He reached over, his large, warm hand covering my clenched fists. The heat of his skin bled through the chill in my fingers. He gently pried my hands open, lacing his fingers through mine. The heavy protective weight of his presence settled over me, melting away the lingering traces of panic Sarah's call had brought into the room. "He's going to crash, Rachel," I whispered, staring at our joined hands. "Without me there to regulate his doses, his stress levels are going to trigger a public rut. The press will slaughter him." "Then he crashes," Rachel said, his thumb brushing slowly over my knuckles. "He's an adult. He's an alpha with unlimited resources. If he can't survive without draining the life out of an Omega, he doesn't deserve the crown he's wearing. You are not responsible for his gravity, Corbin." The Wembley show was delayed by 2 hours. I didn't watch it, but the internet did. When I finally turned my laptop on the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Dathan Lopez stumbles on opening night. Erratic behavior sparks concern for pop prince. Videos circulated on social media. Dathan on stage, sweating profusely, missing cues. His voice, usually flawless, cracked on the high notes. But worse than that was his physical presence. Even through a screen, you could see the jagged, chaotic energy radiating off him. He looked like a man drowning on dry land. The media blamed exhaustion. The fans defended him. But the industry insiders knew exactly what they were looking at. They were looking at an alpha losing control of his biology. Apex Entertainment went into absolute lockdown. They canceled all press interviews for the next week. I knew the sheer terror currently gripping the executive floor. I could almost smell the burnt ozone from 3,000 miles away. 2 days later, it rained again. A heavy, relentless downpour that turned the city streets into slick black mirrors. I was working late at Blueprint. Rachel had stepped out to grab us coffee from the all-night diner down the street. I was sitting at the front reception desk, organizing a touring schedule for a new indie band we had just signed, enjoying the quiet patter of the rain against the large industrial windows. The heavy iron front door of the studio suddenly yanked open. A gust of wet, freezing wind swept into the lobby, carrying with it a scent so sharp, so violently distressed that my Omega instincts immediately spiked. I dropped my pen, shooting up from the chair. Standing in the doorway, soaked to the bone, water dripping from his hair and soaking through a heavy black trench coat, was Dathan Lopez. He looked terrible. The immaculate, untouchable idol from the gala was completely gone. His skin was pale, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with dark, bruised shadows. His chest heaved as he stood in the doorway, his massive frame physically blocking the exit. The scent of burnt ozone and desperate, raw alpha panic flooded the room, so thick it felt like physical pressure against my lungs. He had flown back. He had abandoned a multi-million-dollar European tour, bypassed his security, and tracked me down. Dathan took a heavy, staggering step into the lobby. His eyes locked onto mine, wide and frantic. "Corbin," he choked out, his voice completely broken. "Please." Rainwater dripped from the hem of his expensive wool coat, pooling in dark, muddy circles on the scuffed hardwood floor. Dathan stood in the entryway of the studio like a ghost that had suddenly realized it was dead. His chest heaved. The sheer volume of distress rolling off him was suffocating, a biological tidal wave of burnt ozone and panic that coated the back of my throat. Every Omega instinct wired into my DNA screamed at me to close the distance, to expose my neck, to wrap him in a calm, grounding scent and drag him back from the ledge. It was a primal, agonizing pull. I didn't move a single muscle. I kept my hands planted firmly on the edge of the reception desk. The wood was cold under my palms. "You're in the middle of a European tour, Dathan," I said, my voice completely devoid of the panic he was desperately seeking to mirror. "You need to leave. Now." "I can't." He took another step forward. His boots squeaked loudly against the wet floor. The polished, untouchable mask he wore at the gala was entirely shattered, leaving behind something raw and terrifyingly fragile. "They don't know what they're doing. The new handler. She gave me the wrong dosage. The press is everywhere. The noise, Corbin. The noise is too loud. I can't think. I can't breathe." He raised a shaking hand, rubbing roughly at his jaw. His eyes were wild, darting around the warm, exposed brick lobby of Blueprint Studios, as if searching for threats. "That is an Apex PR problem," I replied flatly. "Call Sarah. Call the agency doctors." "They don't know me!" Dathan shouted, his voice cracking, the raw volume echoing off the high industrial ceiling. He flinched at the sound of his own outburst, his shoulders curling inward. He looked at me, a desperate, hollow pleading in his eyes. "You know me. You know how to fix it. Just give me the shot. Just calm me down. Please. I'll pay you whatever you want. I'll double your old salary, triple it. I'll make them give you an executive title." A bitter, cynical laugh punched its way out of my chest before I could stop it. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "An executive title," I repeated, shaking my head. "You really think this is about a paycheck? You think you can buy back the scaffolding after you intentionally kicked it out from under yourself?" I had to keep my distance. He closed the gap between us, stopping just short of the reception desk. He gripped the edge of the wood so hard his knuckles turned bone white. The acrid stench of his pheromones was blinding now. "You know how this industry works. If the press found out my crisis manager was essentially keeping me medicated and grounded, they would have destroyed me. They would have said I was unstable." "You are unstable," I said softly. I leaned in, meeting his bloodshot eyes. "You've always been unstable. I just built a very pretty cage around you so nobody else could see it. And instead of thanking me, you looked right through me in a room full of people because my existence embarrassed you." Dathan swallowed hard, his jaw trembling. I'm sorry, okay? I made a mistake. Just, Corbin, I can't go back out there. I feel like my skin is burning off." He reached out, his large, shaking hand grasping my wrist. The physical contact sent a jolt of pure, dysregulated alpha energy straight into my nervous system. It was agonizing. My breath hitched. He was trying to force a biological bond, trying to forcibly pull my calming pheromones to the surface to smother his own panic. Before I could rip my arm away, the heavy iron door of the studio swung open. The bell chimed sharply. Rachel stepped inside, shaking the rain from his dark hair, holding a cardboard tray with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He froze. His sharp eyes took in the scene instantly, the puddles on the floor, the suffocating stench of ozone, and Dathan's heavy hand gripping my wrist. Rachel didn't shout. He didn't drop the coffees. He calmly walked over to the small wooden side table near the coat rack and set the tray down. His movements were slow, deliberate, and entirely devoid of fear. When he turned back around, the subtle, grounding scent of petrichor and damp earth that usually hung around him vanished. In its place, a heavy, crushing wave of pure, dominant alpha authority slammed into the room. It wasn't violent. It was absolute. It was the atmospheric pressure dropping right before a hurricane. "Take your hand off him," Rachel said. His voice barely rose above a conversational murmur, but it vibrated through the floorboards. Dathan flinched, his head snapping toward Rachel. The sudden introduction of a rival alpha, a dominant one, threw his already shattered nervous system into complete chaos. He let go of my wrist, taking a stumbling step backward. A low defensive growl rattled in Dathan's chest, a purely instinctual reaction. Rachel didn't even blink. He stepped between us, putting his broad back to me, completely shielding me from Dathan's sightline. "You're trespassing in my studio," Rachel said, his tone icy and precise. "You're harassing my head of operations, and you are severely dysregulated. If you don't walk out that door in the next 5 seconds, I'm not calling the police. I'm calling TMZ, and I'll let them film you having a biological meltdown in a public lobby. This is between me and Corbin." Dathan snarled, attempting to project authority, but his voice shook violently. He tried to step around Rachel. "Get out of my way!" Rachel shifted effortlessly, blocking him again. "Corbin is done with you. You erased him when you were standing in the spotlight. You don't get to drag him back into the dark just because you forgot how to breathe on your own." "Corbin!" Dathan yelled over Rachel's shoulder, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. Tell him you have to fix this. You owe me." I stepped out from behind Rachel. Rachel tensed slightly, ready to intercept if Dathan lunged, but he gave me the space. He didn't try to control the situation. He just acted as a wall I could stand behind if I chose to. I looked at Dathan. I looked at the man who had consumed 3 years of my youth, 3 years of my sleep, 3 years of my dignity. He looked small, stripped of the flashing cameras and the tailored suits. He was just a terrified addict begging for a hit of stability. "I don't owe you anything, Dathan," I said, my voice steady, the words falling from my lips like heavy stones settling at the bottom of a lake. "I gave you your career. Now you have to live in it. Get out." Dathan stared at me. The finality in my voice finally pierced through the haze of his panic. He realized, in that agonizingly quiet moment, that the safety net was truly gone. There was no auto-injector. There was no meticulously crafted PR statement. There was just the cold reality of a bridge entirely burned to ash. He didn't say another word. He couldn't. He turned, pushing heavily through the iron door, and disappeared into the blinding rain. Silence flooded the lobby the moment the door clicked shut. The heavy metallic stench of Dathan's panic lingered in the air, a toxic residue clinging to the brick walls. My knees suddenly felt like they were made of water. I grabbed the edge of the reception desk, squeezing my eyes shut, forcing myself to inhale slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. "Hey." Rachel's voice was soft, entirely stripped of the heavy alpha dominance he had just wielded. I opened my eyes. He was standing right in front of me, his hands raised slightly, palms open, offering comfort but not demanding contact. His scent had immediately shifted back to the soothing, cool rain and rich earth. He was intentionally flooding the space, neutralizing the ozone, flushing the trauma out of the room. "I'm okay," I whispered, though my voice wavered slightly. "You don't have to be," Rachel said. He gently stepped closer, his warm hands cupping my shoulders. His touch was grounding, steadying the tremor running through my spine. "You just stared down a collapsing sun. It's okay to blink." I let out a long, shuddering breath, leaning my forehead against his chest. I didn't care about professionalism in that moment. I just needed the anchor. Rachel wrapped his arms around me, holding me securely. He didn't say anything else. He just let me breathe. We stood there for a long time, the only sound the steady drumming of the rain against the glass. The industry explosion happened precisely 48 hours later. You can't hide a superstar abandoning a sold-out international tour. Apex Entertainment tried. They issued a frantic, patched-together statement citing severe vocal cord exhaustion and mental health prioritization. But the tabloids had already caught wind of Dathan staggering through Heathrow Airport looking completely derailed. Then came the leaks. Crew members from the Wembley show started talking. Backup dancers anonymously posted about the unbearable pheromone drops in the rehearsal rooms. The narrative flipped overnight. Dathan went from the untouchable, disciplined prince of pop to an erratic, unstable liability. Apex's stock plummeted by 14% in a single afternoon. My burner phone rang continuously for 3 days. Sarah left 12 voicemails. The CEO of Apex left 2. They offered me consulting fees that would have bought me a house in the hills. They offered me equity. They offered me anything to come back and put the monster back in the box. I took the phone, walked to the pier behind the studio, and threw it into the freezing gray water. I didn't care. It wasn't my fire anymore. A month passed. The chaos surrounding Dathan slowly faded into a dull, predictable hum of legal battles and canceled sponsorships. He checked himself into a private rehabilitation facility in Switzerland. The agency scrubbed his social media. The ghost had been erased, but the star had completely burned out. Life at Blueprint Studios moved forward with a quiet, beautiful rhythm. It was late Friday night. The rest of the staff had gone home, leaving only Rachel and me in the main mixing booth. We were reviewing the final master track for a folk duo we had been pushing heavily. The studio was dimly lit, bathed in the soft blue glow of the soundboard monitors. I was sitting Lopez-legged on the leather sofa, reviewing the marketing budget on my tablet. Rachel was in the captain's chair, running a final EQ check. They need a stronger push in the college radio markets, I said, highlighting a column of numbers. If we shift 20% of the digital ad spend to localized grassroots promotions, we can build a physical following before the streaming numbers plateau. Rachel spun his chair around. He was wearing his usual faded jeans and a dark gray Henley, looking completely relaxed. He smiled, a genuine warm expression that always made a strange flutter ignite in my chest. "You know, you're terrifyingly good at this," he said, resting his elbows on his knees. "I just make the music sound pretty. You actually make people care about it." "I know how to sell a story," I replied, setting the tablet down on the coffee table. "But it helps when the story is actually authentic. I don't have to manufacture anything here. I don't have to lie." Rachel held my gaze. The space between us felt suddenly charged, but not with the frantic, demanding energy I was used to. It was a slow, magnetic pull, a mutual, respectful gravity. He stood up, Lopezing the short distance between the console and the sofa. He sat down next to me, close enough that our thighs brushed. The scent of petrichor wrapped around me, familiar and profoundly safe. "You look different, Corbin," Rachel said softly. He reached out, his long fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair away from my forehead. His touch sent a warm shiver down my neck. "Different how?" I asked, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "You look like you belong to yourself again." I swallowed, leaning slightly into his touch. For 3 years, I had been an extension of someone else's ego, a shadow cast by a dying star. I'd convinced myself that survival was the same thing as living. "I think I do," I admitted. Rachel's hand slid down to cup my jaw. His thumb brushed over my cheekbone. His eyes asked a quiet, deliberate question. There was no pressure. There was no rush. If I pulled away, he would just smile and go back to the soundboard. I didn't pull away. I leaned in, closing the distance. Our lips met in a slow, grounding kiss. It wasn't a violent collision of desperate instincts. It was warm, patient, and deeply rooted. It tasted like black coffee and absolute certainty. When he wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me flush against his side, I didn't feel smothered. I felt anchored. We broke apart slowly, resting our foreheads together in the quiet blue light of the studio. "I'm glad you walked out of that building, Mendoza," Rachel murmured, his breath warm against my skin. "Yeah," I breathed out, closing my eyes, a genuine smile finally breaking a Lopez my face. "Me too." The ghost was finally dead. But for the first time in my life, I was completely alive. Closure is a manufactured concept sold by therapists and screenwriters to neatly wrap up the messy, jagged edges of human ruin. In reality, trauma rarely gives you a clean ending. It just slowly degrades until you stop noticing the smell. 6 months had passed since Dathan Lopez stumbled into Blueprint Studios and shattered the last remnant of his own myth. Spring had finally thawed the city, replacing the freezing rain with a humid, buzzing warmth. Apex Entertainment had spent the better part of those 6 months bleeding out in the press. They eventually managed to stem the bleeding by sending Dathan to a high-end, heavily fortified rehabilitation center in the Swiss Alps, specifically designed to handle severe alpha dysregulation and chemical dependencies. I didn't keep tabs on his recovery. I didn't care. Until a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at Blueprint's front desk, addressed directly to me. Inside was a formal request from Dathan's medical proxy. It wasn't a threat or a legal injunction. It was an invitation for a mediated session. Step 9 of his recovery program, making direct amends to those he had harmed. I stood by the front window, turning the heavy cardstock over in my hands. Rachel walked up behind me, carrying a stack of vinyl pressings. He didn't ask what I was holding. He simply stopped, leaned against the brick wall, and waited. Dathan wants to apologize, I said, tossing the letter onto the reception desk. Rachel glanced at the paper, his expression completely neutral. Are you going to let him? I don't need his apology, Rachel. I made my peace with his failures a long time ago. You don't need it, Rachel agreed quietly, setting the vinyls down. He stepped closer, his warm hand resting on the small of my back, right at the base of my spine. The subtle scent of petrichor washed over me, grounding and familiar. But sometimes you have to look a ghost in the eye just to prove to yourself that it can't hurt you anymore. If you want to go, I'll drive you. If you want to burn it, I'll hand you the lighter. I stared at the pristine white envelope. Dathan had spent 3 years treating my existence as a shameful secret. Giving him an hour of my time felt like entirely too much generosity. But Rachel was right. Ignoring it meant I was still treating Dathan like a threat. Get the car, I said. The mediator's office was located in a sterile, glass-paneled building downtown, entirely devoid of personality or warmth. It smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and heavily filtered air, a deliberate choice to keep ambient pheromones from clinging to the walls. I sat in a stiff armchair wearing a dark sweater and jeans. I didn't dress up. I wasn't the impeccably tailored Apex fixer anymore, and I had absolutely no desire to play the part. When the heavy oak door opened, the mediator walked in first, followed by Dathan. The physical change was jarring. The untouchable prince of pop was gone. The man who sat down in the chair A. Lopez from me looked completely ordinary. He had lost weight, the sharp edges of his jawline softened by exhaustion. He wore a simple gray knit sweater. His hair was cropped short, stripping away the curated idol aesthetic. But the most shocking difference was his scent. It was muted. The aggressive, suffocating ozone and artificial sandalwood were entirely gone, replaced by the faint, dull scent of heavy chemical suppressants. He was chemically neutralized, tightly leashed by his doctors to prevent another biological spiral. Dathan looked down at his hands, which were resting awkwardly in his lap. He didn't speak for a long time. The mediator sat in the corner, a silent observer. "You look good, Corbin," Dathan finally said. His voice was raspy, missing the velvet smoothness that used to sell millions of records. "I have my weekends back," I replied flatly. "It does wonders for the complexion." "Why am I here, Dathan?" He flinched slightly at the directness. He took a slow, measured breath, a grounding technique he had clearly practiced for weeks. "I'm here to make amends," Dathan started, his eyes lifting to meet mine. They were clear, devoid of the frantic, bloodshot panic I had seen in the studio lobby. "I spent 3 years using you as a crutch, and then I punished you for it. I was terrified of my own weakness. I hated that an Omega had to save me, so I pretended you didn't exist. It was cowardly. It was arrogant. And it destroyed the only real safety I had in this industry." He paused, swallowing hard. "I pushed you to the breaking point, and when you finally walked away, I tried to drag you down with me. I am entirely, completely sorry for the pain I caused you." It was a good apology. It hit all the right clinical markers. He took accountability, he named the abuse, and he didn't make excuses. A year ago, hearing those words might have broken me in half. Now, I just felt profoundly tired. "Thank you for saying that," I said, my voice steady and completely empty of venom. "I accept your apology." Relief washed over his face, a sudden, desperate softening of his features. He leaned forward slightly. Corbin, I'm trying to rebuild. Slowly. No tours, just songwriting. But I need people around me who actually tell me the truth. I need a team that won't just say yes to the monster. I know you're at Blueprint now, but if you ever wanted to consult, stop. The word hung in the air, sharp and absolute. Dathan froze. You misunderstood me, I said, leaning back in my chair, Lopezing my arms. I accept your apology because I recognize that you are doing the work to get better. I think that's commendable. But accepting your apology does not mean you get a seat at my table. It just means I'm no longer angry at you. Dathan's face fell. The desperate, hungry look crept back into his eyes, but the chemical suppressants kept his pheromones from flooding the room. I just thought, since we went through all that together, we have history. We don't have history, Dathan. We have a trauma bond built on a corporate payroll. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floorboards. You broke the foundation a long time ago. There's nothing left to rebuild. I wish you the best in your recovery, but I don't ever want to see you again. I didn't wait for him to respond. I didn't look at the mediator. I turned and walked out the door. When I hit the street level, the humid afternoon air hit my face, smelling like exhaust fumes and hot concrete. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever breathed in. Rachel's black SUV was parked at the curb, the engine idling smoothly. I pulled open the passenger door and climbed in. The interior smelled like petrichor and leather. Rachel shifted the car into drive, glancing over at me. How do you feel? He asked quietly. I reached over, resting my hand on his thigh. He immediately covered my hand with his own, his large fingers lacing through mine. Like I finally took out the trash, I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading a Lopez my face. Let's go home. Show business doesn't run on talent. It runs on desperation. But real life runs on the people who stay when the cameras are turned off. A year and a half after I walked out of Apex Entertainment, Blueprint Studios threw its 5-year anniversary party. We didn't rent a sterile ballroom at the Four Seasons, and we didn't mandate black tie attire. We rented out a massive open-air warehouse in the Arts District, strung up 1,000 bare Edison bulbs, and hired 3 different food trucks to park in the alleyway. The room was packed. Indie rock bands mingled with acoustic folk singers, sound engineers drank cheap beer with marketing interns. It was loud, chaotic, and entirely authentic. I stood near the mixing console that had been set up as a makeshift DJ booth, watching the crowd. The agency had tripled in size since I took over operations. We were pulling top-tier talent away from the corporate giants because we offered something they couldn't buy: actual, untethered creative freedom. You're brooding in the corner at your own party, a voice rumbled right next to my ear. Rachel slipped his arms around my waist from behind, pulling my back flush against his broad chest. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply. His scent was heavy, warm, and entirely content. I'm not brooding, I laughed, leaning my head back against his shoulder. I'm calculating the liability insurance costs of letting the drummer from the Vipers drink tequila on top of a rented speaker stack. Let the insurance handle it on Monday, Rachel murmured, his lips pressing a soft kiss directly over the heavily scarred, permanent bite mark resting on my scent gland. He had claimed me 6 months ago. We didn't do it in a fever haze of biology and uncontrolled ruts. We did it on a quiet Sunday morning in his apartment, completely sober, completely deliberate. It wasn't a transaction. It was a promise. The bite rooted us together, anchoring my nervous system to his, providing a constant, low-level hum of absolute safety. Rachel turned me around so I was facing him. He wore a dark denim jacket over a black t-shirt, looking exactly like the man who had offered me bad scotch at a terrible gala years ago. But the guarded edge in his eyes was entirely gone. He looked at me with a reverence that still managed to knock the breath out of my lungs. You built this, you know, Rachel said, gesturing toward the packed warehouse. I just gave them a microphone. You gave them a home. We built it, I corrected, reaching up to adjust the collar of his jacket. Scaffolding doesn't work if the foundation is rotting. You gave me solid ground to stand on. Alapez the Room, the lead singer of one of our biggest bands, climbed onto a chair, raising a plastic cup of beer and shouting a completely off-pitch toast to the studio. The crowd erupted into cheers and laughter. There was no burnt ozone. There was no panic. Just the overwhelming, beautiful scent of people who were genuinely happy to be exactly where they were. Rachel smiled, looking down at me. The ambient light from the Edison bulbs caught the sharp angles of his face. "Are you happy, Mendoza?" I thought about the 3 a.m. panic attacks, the shattered glass in penthouse suites, the cold dismissal in crowded ballrooms. I thought about the ghost I used to be, hovering in the background of someone else's life, desperate for scraps of validation. I looked at Rachel, feeling the steady, rhythmic pulse of our bond humming quietly beneath my skin. I didn't just survive the fire, I walked out of the ashes and built an empire. "Yeah," I said, pulling him down by the lapels for a slow, deep kiss right in the middle of the chaotic room. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." That wraps up Corbin's journey from the shadows to standing entirely in his own light. Survival in a toxic environment usually means becoming toxic yourself, but Corbin chose to walk away and build an empire on his own terms. If you loved this deep dive into the darker, more realistic side of the Omegaverse, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more original BL audio dramas. Drop a comment below. Did Dathan deserve a second chance? Or was Corbin right to shut the door permanently? See you in the next story.